There is a question that has fascinated historians, soldiers, and storytellers for 200 years. How does a boy from a small island, with no money, no connections, no powerful family, become the ruler of almost the entire continent of Europe? How does someone who was mocked for his accent, laughed at for being an outsider, dismissed as too small and too foreign, end up placing a crown on his own head in front of the most powerful people in the world? The answer is not simple. It is a story about hunger, about obsession, about a mind so restless and so brilliant that it simply could not accept the limits the world tried to place on it. And it begins on a small, quiet island in the Mediterranean Sea, the island of Corsica. The year is 1769. Corsica has just been sold by the Republic of Genoa to France. The Corsican people are furious. They had fought for their independence. They had almost won, and then, without warning, they were handed to another power like property. And on the 15th of August, in a house in the city of Ajaccio, a baby boy is born. His name is Napoleon Bonaparte. His first words will be Italian. His island will be French. And one day his name will be known in every language on earth. His mother, Letizia, is only 19 years old when Napoleon is born. She is already one of the most formidable women you could imagine. Strong, disciplined, unbreakable. A woman who believed that life requires hard work and that softness is a luxury the poor cannot afford. She would raise 8 children with iron discipline. She was the first great force that shaped Napoleon Bonaparte. And what she taught him above everything else was this: you do not wait for the world to give you what you want, you take it. Young Napoleon was a difficult child. Mischievous, stubborn, argumentative. He refused to follow rules he thought were stupid and argued with anyone who tried to limit him. But he was also different from every other child around him. He read everything: history, geography, mathematics, military strategy. He consumed books the way other children consumed food. He was 10 years old when his father made the decision that would alter everything. Carlo Bonaparte used his carefully cultivated connections with French officials to secure places at French military schools for his sons. Napoleon left Corsica for the first time. He did not speak the language of the country he was being sent to. He did not know anyone there. He would not see his family again for months. But he went. Because even at 10 years old, Napoleon Bonaparte was not afraid of what was ahead. He was only afraid of staying where he was. Napoleon was transferred to a military school at Brienne-le-Château in northeastern France. He would spend 5 years there. They were not easy years. From the moment Napoleon arrived at Brienne, he was different from the other boys. His French was accented, heavy with the sounds of Corsica and Italy. The other boys noticed immediately. They mocked him. They called him the foreigner. They made fun of the way he spoke. He was also small, slight, thin, physically unimposing in a school full of boys who had grown up in France and carried themselves with the easy confidence of people who belonged. Napoleon did not belong, and so he did what outsiders often do when they cannot win the social game. He retreated into the one thing he could control, his mind. He studied with a ferocity that alarmed his teachers. Mathematics became an obsession. He had a natural, almost frightening ability to process numbers and solve problems faster than anyone around him. He read accounts of great commanders: Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Hannibal, Frederick the Great. He studied their campaigns. He memorized battles the way other boys memorized games. He was quiet, intense, difficult to approach, but he had one thing no one could take from him: a ferocious, unbreakable pride. When boys mocked him, he did not cry. He did not beg for acceptance. He turned cold, and he worked harder. There is a story from his years at Brienne that tells you everything about who Napoleon was. During a winter snowfall, Napoleon organized his fellow students into teams for a snowball battle. He designed fortifications. He planned attack and defense strategies. He directed the other boys like a general directing troops. The teachers watching from the windows looked at each other. This boy, this strange, intense foreign boy, had just run a military exercise in the snow. At 15, Napoleon transferred to the prestigious École Militaire in Paris, the elite academy where France trained its finest officers. And then, disaster. His father died. Carlo Bonaparte died of stomach cancer in February 1785. He was not yet 40 years old. Napoleon was 16. His family now had almost no income. His mother was in Corsica with younger siblings to feed. Napoleon completed a 2-year course in 1 year. He slept little, studied constantly, pushed himself beyond anything his classmates attempted. In September 1785, at 16 years old, Napoleon Bonaparte graduated from the École Militaire. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in an artillery regiment. The boy from the small island was now an officer of the French army. But the world he was stepping into was about to change in ways that no one could have predicted. Because France, the great, proud kingdom of France, was about to explode. The late 1780s in France were a time of extraordinary tension. The country was essentially bankrupt. The harvests had failed. The price of bread had risen beyond what ordinary people could afford. And yet the king, Louis XVI, and the aristocracy continued to live in unimaginable luxury at the Palace of Versailles. The people of France had had enough. On the 14th of July 1789, a mob stormed the Bastille, the great fortress prison in Paris that had become a symbol of royal tyranny. The French Revolution had begun. What followed was one of the most violent and dramatic periods in European history. The monarchy was overthrown. The king was arrested. Eventually, he was executed, guillotined in a public square while the crowds cheered. A radical faction called the Jacobins took control. They began the Reign of Terror. Thousands were arrested, accused of being enemies of the Republic, and sent to the guillotine within days. Nobody was safe. And in the middle of this chaos, a young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte was watching. He was watching how power moved in times of chaos. He was watching who rose and who fell, and he was learning. The moment that first brought Napoleon to the attention of the revolutionary government came in 1793. The British had allied with French royalists and seized the port of Toulon, a crucial naval base in southern France. The French army could not retake it. The commanders had placed their artillery in entirely the wrong positions. The siege was going nowhere. Napoleon stepped forward. He identified a key hilltop position. If French artillery could be placed there, it would command the harbor. The British ships would be forced to leave. Without the ships, the British and royalist forces inside Toulon would be cut off. They would have no choice but to surrender. His plan was adopted. He personally directed the placement of the artillery. He fought alongside his men. He was wounded. A British soldier bayoneted him in the thigh during one of the assaults. He refused to leave the field, and his plan worked. Toulon fell. Napoleon Bonaparte was promoted to brigadier general. He was 24 years old. Then, in October 1795, Paris exploded again. Royalist forces attempted an armed uprising in the streets. They outnumbered the government forces significantly. They were marching on the parliament itself. The government needed someone who could stop them. Napoleon was called in. He made one decision: artillery. He positioned cannon in the streets of Paris. When the royalist forces advanced, he ordered his gunners to fire. It was not a warning shot. It was a direct, lethal blast of artillery at point-blank range. He would later refer to it coldly as a whiff of grape shot. The uprising collapsed within minutes. The government was saved, and Napoleon Bonaparte, overnight, became the most powerful military figure in France. The outsider, the foreigner, the boy who was mocked for his accent, was now the most talked-about man in Paris. Napoleon was given command of the Army of Italy. He arrived at his headquarters in Nice in March 1796 to find an army on the verge of mutiny. The men had not been paid in months. Uniforms were in rags. Entire battalions had no shoes. Muskets, food, ammunition, all in desperately short supply. His generals, older, more experienced officers, looked at this 26-year-old with open contempt. They smirked. They whispered that he had gotten this command through connections rather than ability. Napoleon gathered his officers and spoke. He said, "Soldiers, you are hungry and naked. The government owes you much but can give you nothing. I will lead you into the most fertile plains on earth. Rich provinces, opulent towns, all shall be at your disposal. Then he proved it. He had developed an approach to warfare his opponents simply could not match. Speed. His army moved faster than any comparable force in Europe. He stripped away unnecessary supplies. He lived off the land. He demanded marches that other generals would have considered impossible. Division. He divided his enemy's forces, attacked one section before the other could reinforce it, defeated each part separately. Deception. He feinted, moved armies in false directions, then struck where they were weakest. The results were devastating, battle after battle, victory after victory. Within 2 weeks of taking command, Napoleon had knocked the Kingdom of Sardinia out of the war entirely. He then turned on Austria. At the Battle of Lodi, a brutal crossing of a fortified bridge under fire, Napoleon personally led his troops across, fighting alongside them in the smoke and chaos. The soldiers began to call him by a nickname after Lodi, the Little Corporal, not an insult, an expression of affection. Soldiers claiming this general as one of their own. By 1797, the Austrian Empire, one of the most powerful states in Europe, was forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty. Napoleon returned to France as a hero. And then, on the 2nd of December 1804, in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, he became Emperor Napoleon I. The Pope himself came from Rome to attend the ceremony. And then Napoleon did something no one had anticipated. He reached into the ceremony and took the crown. He placed it on his own head. He did not wait for the Pope to crown him. He did not ask for anyone's blessing. He crowned himself. The message was absolutely clear. I owe this to no one. I did this myself. The outsider from Corsica, the boy who had been mocked for his accent, was now Emperor of France. And in December 1805, at a place called Austerlitz, he fought what is considered one of the greatest battles in military history. Outnumbered by the combined Austrian and Russian armies, Napoleon deliberately weakened his right flank to lure the enemy into attacking it. When they moved, he struck the center with devastating force. The Allied army was cut in two. Russian soldiers fleeing across frozen lakes fell through the ice as French artillery fired at them. The Allied army lost 25,000 men. Napoleon lost fewer than 7,000. He said afterward, "The Battle of Austerlitz is the finest of all I have fought." At the height of his power, Napoleon controlled more of Europe than anyone since Charlemagne. But the higher you rise, the further you can fall. Napoleon had one obsession he could never quite resolve: Britain. The British refused to make peace. They funded coalition after coalition against him. They controlled the seas. He tried to strangle Britain economically, closing every European port to British trade. To enforce this, he needed to control more and more of Europe, which led him, ultimately, to the decision that destroyed everything: Russia. In the summer of 1812, Napoleon assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen. Over 600,000 soldiers, French, German, Polish, Italian, soldiers from across the empire. They marched east into Russia. The Russian army did not fight directly, they retreated. As they moved back, they burned their own villages, destroyed their own crops, left nothing for the advancing French army to live on. Napoleon reached Moscow in September 1812. Moscow was empty. The Russians had evacuated the city and set it on fire. Napoleon sat in the ruins and waited for Russia to come to him, to surrender, to negotiate. Russia did not come. Napoleon waited for weeks. And then winter arrived. The Russian winter of 1812 was one of the coldest in recorded history. Napoleon had not prepared his army for it. They lacked winter clothing. They lacked food. They were hundreds of miles from France in a burned and hostile country. Napoleon ordered the retreat, and the retreat became one of the most catastrophic events in military history. Soldiers died not in battle, but from cold, from starvation, from exhaustion, from attacks by Russian cavalry who harried the freezing column every single day. Out of over 600,000 soldiers who marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned in any condition to fight. The invincible army of Napoleon Bonaparte had been destroyed, not by a single great battle, but by winter and hunger and the vast, merciless geography of Russia. The nations of Europe, who had been waiting, formed a great coalition and marched on France. Napoleon fought back brilliantly, but he was overwhelmed. In April 1814, for the first time in his life, Napoleon had no choice left. He abdicated the throne. He was sent into exile on the island of Elba, but 10 months later he escaped. He landed in southern France with fewer than 1,000 men. The government sent soldiers to arrest him. Napoleon stepped out alone in front of them. He opened his coat. He said, "If there is any man among you who wishes to shoot his emperor, here I am." Not a single shot was fired. The soldiers joined him instead. He marched north. His army grew with every step. He entered Paris on the 20th of March 1815. He was emperor again, but it lasted only 100 days. At a place called Waterloo in Belgium, on the 18th of June 1815, Napoleon faced the British forces under Wellington. He attacked again and again. Wellington's lines bent, but did not break. And then in the late afternoon, the Prussian army arrived. Napoleon was caught between two armies. His forces broke. He was captured by the British, and this time they sent him to St. Helena, a tiny, remote island in the South Atlantic Ocean, 3,000 miles from Europe. He would never leave it. On the 5th of May 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte died. He was 51 years old. He fought 60 battles in his career. He lost 7. He is ranked alongside Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar as one of the greatest military commanders in history. The Napoleonic Code he created, declaring all men equal before the law regardless of birth, influenced legal systems across the world. France, Belgium, Spain, Italy, Louisiana, Quebec. His fingerprints are visible in dozens of countries today. His last written words were, "I wish my ashes to rest on the banks of the Seine." In the midst of that French people which I have loved so much, he was not a perfect man. He caused enormous suffering. The wars he fought killed millions. But his story, the story of a boy from a small island who was marked, dismissed, and overlooked, who refused to accept the limits the world tried to place on him, that story has never stopped speaking to people. Because he showed what a human being is capable of, when hunger meets discipline. When an outsider refuses to stay outside, he was not born to greatness. He built it with his own hands, and then he placed the crown on his own head, because that was always who Napoleon Bonaparte was, a man who waited for no one. Thank you for watching Shadow Files. If this story moved you, subscribe for more new stories every week.